Adam Neumann grew up in Israel, moved to New York as a kid, struggled with dyslexia through school, and by his early 20s had already failed at two businesses. One selling women's shoes with retractable heels, another making baby clothes with knee pads sewn into them so kids wouldn't scrape themselves crawling around. Neither worked, but he kept going anyway. The idea that actually stuck came almost by accident. He and a friend, Miguel McKelvey, were renting out a floor of a building in Brooklyn and noticed something. Small businesses and freelancers didn't want to sign 5-year office leases, but they also didn't want to work out of a coffee shop forever. So they started subdividing office space and renting it out flexibly. They called it Green Desk. It worked well enough that they sold it and used the money to start something with a bigger name and a much bigger idea: WeWork. On paper, the business was almost embarrassingly simple. Sign a long lease on a building at one price, fix it up, rent out the desks inside for a much higher price, month to month. That's it. That's the whole model. Real estate arbitrage, dressed up in exposed brick and free kombucha. But dressing it up turned out to be the entire skill. Neumann didn't pitch WeWork as an office rental company. Nobody gets a multi-billion-dollar valuation renting desks. He pitched it as something closer to a movement. Elevate the world's consciousness was unbelievably an actual line in WeWork's mission statement. He'd ask employees what their superpower was. There was beer on tap, meditation rooms, a whole vocabulary built around community and purpose that had almost nothing to do with what the company was actually doing, which was leasing office furniture. And it was working, in the sense that money kept showing up. Lots of it. By 2019, WeWork's valuation had climbed to $47 billion, more than most airlines, more than most hotel chains, for a company that was, functionally, a landlord with better branding. Then it went public, or tried to. The IPO filing is really where the whole thing started coming apart, because for the first time, anyone outside the company could actually look at the numbers, and the numbers were bad. In 2018 alone, WeWork lost $1.6 billion while bringing in $1.8 billion in revenue, spending almost $2 for everyone they made. There were also details that had nothing to do with the balance sheet and everything to do with how strange the whole operation had become. Neumann had personally trademarked the word "we" and then licensed it back to his own company for close to $6 million. He flew around on private jets that, according to later reporting, were regularly filled with marijuana smoke. There was a tequila shot before company meetings became something close to tradition. His wife, Rebecca, who co-founded the company with him, held a role with the actual title Chief Brand and Impact Officer, and reportedly fired employees she decided gave off bad energy. None of this had been secret exactly. It just hadn't mattered yet because the money kept flowing and nobody with real leverage had stopped to ask why. Once the IPO filing forced everyone to actually look, the questions came fast, and Neumann didn't survive them. Within weeks of the filing, he resigned as CEO. The IPO was pulled entirely. The valuation, which had been sitting at $47 billion, collapsed to under $8 billion almost overnight and kept sliding from there. Here's the part that a lot of people still find hard to believe, though. SoftBank, the investment firm that had poured billions into WeWork and was now watching that bet implode, didn't just let Neumann walk away, they paid him to leave. As part of the exit deal, Neumann received a package worth somewhere between $450 million and $1.7 billion, depending on which reporting you go by, plus SoftBank agreed to buy back a huge chunk of his shares. Buried in one paragraph of a Delaware court filing was a commitment from SoftBank to provide up to $5 billion in financing just to keep the company alive long enough for the exit to actually happen. So the man whose leadership had just destroyed roughly $40 billion in paper value left the building with hundreds of millions of dollars, cash in hand, while employees who'd been paid partly in now worthless stock options got nothing close to that kind of landing. WeWork itself limped on for a few more years under new leadership, eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2023, and emerged as a much smaller, much quieter company, a shadow of the $47 billion story it used to tell about itself. Neumann, for his part, didn't disappear. A few years later, he launched a new company called Flow, this time in residential real estate, pitching renters a vague path to ownership that, according to people who've actually reviewed the paperwork, doesn't appear to exist in any concrete legal form. And investors funded it anyway. Andreessen Horowitz put in $350 million at over $1 billion valuation, the largest early-stage check the firm had ever written. By 2025, Flow had raised more and was valued at roughly $2.5 billion. One of the firm's partners was reportedly asked why they'd back someone with Neumann's track record, and the answer was something like, they back founders who can bend reality, which is, when you actually sit with it, a strange thing to say about the same skill that just cost thousands of people their jobs and savings a few years earlier. Maybe that's the real story here. Not that WeWork collapsed, plenty of companies collapse. It's that the person responsible for the collapse got to keep the money, keep the reputation for being a visionary, and go raise hundreds of millions more almost immediately after. The system didn't really punish what happened, it just moved on to the next pitch.